Hey, everybody, welcome back to Educational Triage. This is Tony, and of course, we have our fabulous Philip.
Aloha.
Hey, Philip. And tonight we are talking about schools behind bars. Part of this came from a subreddit that we found, and we were reading through it. And some people were talking about how wonderful it was to work in a prison or detention center, and others were talking about how it was one of the most difficult jobs that they ever took and that they just didn't have the temperament for it. And I think you do
Right.
have to have the right temperament for it, correct?
I believe you do. Yeah, there's some, I don't know what it would be. I mean,
I think
I couldn't
I
say
think you
for
have to
sure.
look at the kid and not the
Yeah.
crime.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, that was, yeah, big time. I
I
was, I
think
was
that
actually unaware many times, and I wanted to stay unaware of the particular crime that one of my students had committed. I did not want to know. It was being dealt with somewhere else in treatment and in group, and that was their job. And my job was to educate this kid and develop that relationship. I did change. I did treat them differently since, well, I work with sex offenders, so they have certain behaviors you watch for and you should become aware of, and
Mhm.
certain images and ideas and such you don't talk about in front of an SO, but yeah, but other than that, it was always just interested in the same learning relationship I have with any student, especially them, because a lot of
Right.
them were behind. They're like, holy cow. So it's kind of almost, well, it wasn't kind of almost, it was a good thing. A lot of times it was a smaller school. So a lot of these kids got a lot of my attention.
I think what makes people crazy when they go into a situation like this, and I had to really rewire my brain in order to figure it out,
Mm,
was when you're dealing with a transitional kind of setting where a student might be there for 1 day to 2 weeks, maybe, waiting
mm,
for their placement to go through, waiting for something else to happen, and you don't
yeah.
know where they are, and maybe you feel like you made a connection, next day they're not there. And how do you teach those students? And so that was perhaps one of the better challenges I found, and I do like a good challenge,
I
but I
remember
think
that challenge.
so.
However, it did lead to a very interesting situation for me, which tested my nimble and agile skills as an educator. Because you're
Yeah,
right, I got a kid in for like a day or two. Or sometimes I'd ask, "How long? Do you know how long they'll be here?" Nope, haven't got a clue. It's like, really?
you
Hmm.
really don't. You
They
really don't.
didn't. And some kids would be there for a long while, and they would become very stable factors. And I would
Mhm.
definitely use that, you know. And
Yeah.
they'd earn status from behavior.
If you're a teacher and you're teaching in the mainstream, or let's say that you are in an alternative program, or you're a parent, or you're just a community member and you want to know what gets these kids into lockup, into these troubles, hopefully we'll be able to bring some more light to the how the school to prison pipeline actually begins and how it sort of coalesces and gets bigger on another episode here soon. So the things that every offender tends to show is that they have low achievement in school. So every time that a teacher says, "You're not here, whatever, we're going to move on past you." And they have the machine. We've talked about the machine, how the machine just kind of grinds kids out. And some of those kids aren't there. And for some one factor or another, they don't get it. They need a little bit of extra help.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
they fall behind exponentially at very early ages.
right.
You know, a
And there's
whole
no
half
way
year
for them to catch
behind
up.
is, yeah, is going to set you back like almost impossibly. So if
And
you're cruising this, yeah, yeah,
children of poverty are
yeah,
usually the ones who are hardest hit.
hmm,
Second one would be academic failure. So if
hand in
students
hand.
aren't doing well academically and if they
Yeah.
fail, I think going to the Carol Dweck, looking at growth mindset, if teachers can look at students and say, "You're not there yet,"
Hmm.
that's much better than giving them the F And I know a lot of teachers like to do, because they like everything regimented and they want to have the ABCDF or the incomplete or something, and they want everything
Yeah.
boxed up because it works for them and they can put everything into a nice tidy box.
That's
But
how the system
education is
works.
messy
Yeah, that's how the schedule works. That's how education works. That's how this unit works.
because
Yeah,
you allow it to work that way.
yeah, you pretty much make it work that way.
They'll have a negative attitude towards school.
Mm-hmm.
So,
It's
how are you creating a positive environment for every student that walks through that door? How are you creating that so that every time a student walks through the door, it's a brand new day for them, it's a brand new opportunity for them?
it's an
And
incredible amount of pressure, but it's so important.
it is so bloody difficult. And there are some days when you can tell the kids, if you have a good relationship with them, I really want you guys to feel good about today, but I feel like crap. I can't do it. So show me how I can make today better.
Actually, that's the best strategy. Hey, I need your help.
Yeah,
Because it's
there's
not, you're
nothing
not
wrong with
on
asking
every
for
day.
help.
No, nothing at all, especially if your kids are like in tune with you.
Right. And then we have low bonding to school. Like their affinity to school just isn't there.
Yeah.
They don't really, there's no reason for them to be there. So, and that also includes low school attachment. There's nothing about school that they really want to be there for. And part of that onus is on the teachers, it's on the administration, it's on the school culture, it's on everybody, it's on the parents as well.
Yeah.
So, the low commitment to school and then having frequent school transitions. If your parents move a lot,
Mm-hmm.
if there is a reason why you have to leave one school and move to another school and it's constant and it happens a lot, I know. I went to one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight schools,
In what, in grades 1 through 12?
grades K through 12.
K through 12. Well, oh, okay, good. Oh,
So,
wow.
and I met another kid when I came to my last high school. He and I were sitting together and I said, and we were talking, and he said, "Oh, good, you're new too." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Where'd you come from?" And he said, "Which time?" He said, "This is my fourth school this year."
Wow.
I said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "No, my
Yeah.
mom moves us a lot." And then he was gone within 2 days.
Your mom moves you a lot.
So, and I said, where did you last live? And I think he had last lived in like Arizona or something. And so it's not just like local moves, it's huge geographic moves. So, because every time that a kid transitions, there has to be a new reassessment of them because the school records, while they are supposed to follow the kid, it takes time for them to get there. And then the teacher has to figure out, or the staff or whatever, you have to figure out where that student is and what his or her levels of proficiency are. What
I
can they
can,
do?
I can tell you from experience that it would take a little while, from a few days to a few weeks, maybe longer, district to
Could take a year.
district. It could take never to get it from some other state. I don't think I ever had records come and transferred easily or at all from anybody who came in from out of state. It was
I
just like
received school
lost
records.
forever.
I finally found the school records
Yeah.
for one of my students, and his parents were both educators. And I went in there, and the parents had actually and fraudulently put in false records
Get out.
into the student's cum file with things like the student's eyes work independently of his brain. So we had to have an eye appointment for the kid where they would go in there, and the doctor threw that one out because he said that's impossible. Your eyes cannot work independently of your brain. If they did, you would be blind. And the parents
Defeat the
were
whole purpose
furious,
then, wouldn't it?
and they were trying everything possible to try to get their kid on an IEP, but the kid didn't qualify. And the kid outsmarted them in many ways. But still, I mean, it still took almost a month and a half to 2 months to get those records.
I don't even. Yeah, that's insane.
And if you're working in a program or if you're working in a school and requesting records and you have another school that is overseeing what you're doing, that complicates things even further. So, okay, low academic aspirations. If a kid comes in
That's
and
true.
says, I don't know what I want to do. I really, because I'm too stupid. I can't do the math. I can't read this. There are some kids who are in lockup who cannot read or write. They
True.
don't know how, and they're high school age. They're almost ready to graduate. Why? How did that happen? That is on the school. It is on the school. So
It
think
is.
about that. Think about suspensions. When you suspend a kid, how is that helping them academically? And how is that helping the community? Same thing with expulsions and exclusions. Did you
With
know
the
that
community?
46 to 80% of those incarcerated in juvenile detention facilities had been expelled or excluded from school?
How many?
46 to 80%. Depends on ethnicity and gender.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. Oh gosh.
So if we talk about truancy and absenteeism, how are we that I think goes along with school attachment. Why isn't the kid there? True. Some families hold their kids back because culturally maybe
Yeah.
parents need to be working.
There's
In
that. That
some
can happen.
families, the kids need to be working. School takes a back seat to survival, and there's nothing you can do about that. You come up with a better option for them to survive. That makes then you have something.
That's a
But you
middle
can't
class
say
lens when you look at it. That well, how come you're not
exactly.
allowed to work? Well, what do you? This is your job. It's like not if I want to eat.
Right. Right. You know,
Yeah.
inadequate school climate. What's an inadequate school climate?
Oof, well, shall we list them off? Any place from yeah, out of control bullying to just a segregated school with really cruddy facilities and building conditions.
I
I
would say it
mean,
goes further than that.
yeah,
I would say any climate where a kid walks through the door and they do not feel welcome, they do not feel wanted, they do not feel needed, they don't feel as though they're going to be able to count for anything.
yeah, it's not conducive to learning comfortably and safely.
Right. School dropout. If a kid drops out of school, they're more inclined to be incarcerated later on. Also, grade repetition. Now, this was interesting.
Hmm.
The later in life, say in like later middle school or even high school, if a student has to repeat a grade, they are more likely, there's a 50-50 chance of them going into some form of lockup.
Wow.
So, okay, here's some other
Well,
factors. Remedial or low achieving in juvenile justice education. The remedial, if they're at a remedial level or they're low achieving, the recidivism rates are 2 times higher than others.
that makes total sense.
So if you're working in juvenile justice or you have a student who comes back from juvenile justice and they're in your room and they are low achieving, what are you doing to help support them? How are you finding resources? Because it shouldn't all be on your shoulders. We're not saying that. We're saying, how do you grab the resources and get others to work with you so that you can work with that student and bring them up. Your teachers are smart people. I do know some very lazy teachers who say, "Well, that's not my problem. That's the parents' problem." But overall, teachers know, and I think teachers tend to have huge hearts and they really do want to help. And sometimes they feel helpless, but finding the right resources and working with the students, I think that can be done. Above average academics, there are some kids who are good about attendance, they're really good with their academics. Now they are less likely to reoffend because they already have some form of success. So
Yeah.
let's take a look and let's say that success is the key component. How do we pave the road to success for all these students? Does that is that making a lot more sense?
Yeah, it's really imperative that, well, it's prevention. It's going to the source of the problem before it becomes the problem.
Right.
Keeping kids in school, keeping schools involved and vibrant and learning easy, easier, safer, and more accommodating. Better schools, less of these kids in the prison systems and the adjudicated programs that they need. Now, there are some things that will happen, and there are some programs, and kids get involved in drugs or there's sex offenses and things like that. But generally speaking, there's a culture of crime outside of school. And if you make schools uninviting, people are invited to go commit those things too. It's really not good. I can think of one kid. I keep on having this one kid I had where he was a very, very undereducated, very large black male kid. I love the heck out of him. But I just feared for him because his abilities were so low, his comprehension was so low. I'm pretty sure there was really low intellect, not just uninvolvement with school since forever, and he was a big black kid, and it just was like, oh, dude, because he could be misunderstood so quickly, and then you start to go, are you giving me any guff? And you go, hey, wait a second here, and he's a kid. He was only 16, and he was about
Hmm.
6'2" and onward about 250. He was. The
It's what
football
I call
coaches would have been after him for sure in a regular school.
they're the ones I call the baby Hueys
Yeah, he was like that. Oh wow, football team. He's my first pick. That
because
guy.
you have
Yeah,
this humongous kid.
yeah.
And so you think of them as being much older than they are,
You do.
but they're really younger. And so you have to imagine them as a baby Huey.
Oh no. Yeah,
So we're also looking at
baby
students
Huey.
who have a lower overall IQ score.
And that's it. That's would
Low
be
standard
just it.
achievement, low standardized achievement. They don't do well on the tests. And they
Mm-mm.
have a low verbal and low math scale scores.
Yeah,
These all link to recidivism because if they can't do things, what kind of future do they actually have? What's
exactly. What
You
what
don't
what can they
have
offer?
anything. And we're going to talk about outcomes pretty soon. So let's talk about special ed now. Special ed is overrepresented in the courts. They are, they have emotional disabilities, they have specific learning disabilities. Now, autism spectrum disorder, developmental cognitive disabilities, physical sensory impaired, and language and speech impaired are underrepresented. Okay? So, in the juvenile justice educational program, students with disabilities are less likely to earn grade promotions and diplomas with peers, despite being on par with them with grades in their work.
Yeah,
So
well, that makes
that
that rings.
I read that over and over and over and kept looking for a little bit more of a definition on that, but that's what I had. Okay. History of special education is limited to recidivism,
Yeah. I
but those with disabilities are more likely to return to school than those without disabilities.
wonder if that's a support issue.
I think it is a support issue.
They're just they paid
Now,
attention to. I'm sorry, it's
now
terrible.
here's something that I found absolutely fascinating, and
Yeah.
that's one third of students in juvenile justice education are
Yeah.
qualified special education.
Okay. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
over 33%. Now, when we did our numbers in my program, we started realizing we were at one point we were at 45% special ed, and they were
Oh,
trying to give us more special ed students, and we had to say no, we
that I
can't take any more
recall.
special ed students. We need you guys to pare those back, because they were trying to figure out a way that they could use us as a dumping ground. And while I loved all the kids, we thought the kids were wonderful, but we had other students who wanted to get in too. And so we were able to figure something out, because all the special ed kids required extra. And
Yep.
there was nothing wrong with that. But you cannot work with five extras at the same time effectively and efficiently. So it all worked out. But by the same
I recall
token,
that. Yeah.
alternative ed, I will say, has a much higher population of special ed in it than regular ed. And regular ed, if you look at the special ed population, they tend to be around plus a little under 9%.
Yeah. Generally speaking, like, yeah, 9, 10, 11% is your general population of special ed.
Mm-hmm.
But not for the alternative programs. Those tend to go up quick. And then I do recall that there was a little debate there about all the kids that were special ed coming in. I'm like, hey, slow down here. It's like I got to pay attention to some other kids that are actually at grade level and things like that. And I can't give my attention to both levels. It couldn't quite bring the two curriculums gracefully together on a big scale.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to sort of I was using a lot of peers as well to help the kids learn. And that was helpful as well. But you can't have more people who need help than peers.
So here's the outcomes that come from this are students can get a GED or a high school diploma many times. Except I had a student who was coming out of one of the programs. They told him he was graduating, and then an hour before graduation, they told him he was 2 credits short.
Who did this? Who made this incredibly big boo
I'm
boo?
not going to say. I'm not
Okay.
going to say. I was absolutely furious. I
I'm
was
just gonna,
absolutely furious. I was at his graduation. This was in another
yes.
part of the state. I had just driven over there with a social worker who was one of the caseworkers for the family.
Yeah.
And we learned of this, and he was very upset. And so
I
we had to calm
bet.
him down. His mama was there, and his siblings were there. We got him calmed down. I had to make phone calls to
Yeah.
find out what we were going to do for him, because now we had to pick up and figure out how we were going to take care of him, because instead of being a feather in our cap, all of a sudden that feather was shoved up into another part of the body, and
Ram
that
feather.
had no pores. So we were able to get him into another program. But but this was the one that I told you that did not do well
Yeah.
when he came back. He would have done much better. He and I were talking
Ay,
about
ay, ay.
jobs, and he said I went and I interviewed for a job at this one place, and I said, "Okay, did you fill out the application?" He said no, because they wanted me to drug test before I could fill out an application. And so he was back to his old self. But that goes back to the
Yeah.
adage, you need to change your playpen, you need to change your playmates. And for
Yeah.
a lot of our kids, they're so fragile. They don't have that ability because nobody is there. And so as a
Well,
mentor,
yeah.
they thought that I could help him, but the mentor can only do so much. If there's nothing coming from the other side, then you can't constantly be trying to chase somebody down while you're holding down a job and doing everything else. I did the best I could. We still had contact. We stayed in touch for several years, but it was hit and miss.
I
So,
just
okay.
to add some. Yeah. some insight into what might have drawn that student away so rapidly, or incredibly or incredulously, is the culture of poverty. A lot of
Yes.
times, if we're speaking about certain situations where you don't have any money, then everyone shares resources, and that culture becomes an interdependent sort of thing, and it's
Hmm.
embedded. And if you don't have anything, at least you got them. And that's a lot of times a big pull, the culture of poverty. These people need me as much as I need them. And you stay in that cycle. So you'll go backward into it. So that might account for some of what was going on there. But
Right. I don't think that he was so surprised he did so well in all of his classes. He plowed through a lot of them. The part of the problem is that, and we talked about this a little bit, I think, last week, with the state mandating that you have to have X number of hours of coursework
yeah,
or
yeah,
instruction time. And
yeah.
so I know that he could have plowed through a lot more and taken care of those 2 credits, but we're we're starting to figure out ways. We're starting to get a little bit more motivated to try to figure out how to work with the state in changing these ideals. And I know a lot of people say, no, you can't change those rules. Yeah, you can. And it's not about having this one standard. It's about not listening to what is needed and what's necessary.
It's not how long you sat in a chair.
Exactly. Seat
Yeah, it's
time
not.
is ridiculous, and it's a fight that at least at the state level, and I know at the national level, that a lot of different programs and a lot of organizations have been trying to fight. But then when you have legislators and you have politicians, you have all these other people, these policymakers, and we talked about educational policymakers, they don't
Yeah.
know what they're talking about because
They don't know about
they
education.
their shoes have never been dirtied by the mud of the school
Walking to
or the
school?
dust.
Hell no. I could get sick. Places are cesspools.
They mandate these things without giving a second thought. And even superintendents and school boards, they just look at the bright, shiny princess or prince that they have and how many valedictorians they're going to have. They don't really care that much. They will say that they do, but then you look at their actions, they don't really do that much for the underserved populations. So, okay. So, mentorships and internships, if those can be set up for students, because having a job and having a future tends to be the one thing that really motivates them.
This here
Getting a
state
high
has a
school
good program
diploma.
about that. Yeah. This here state has a really good program about getting the
Mhm.
diploma or the GED and secondary ed, vocational programs,
And I
community
will say
colleges.
that one of the big state juvenile lockup facilities, they have some really good skill centers where they're working with them. But then here's the cool thing, and this is something I didn't know. If you can set them up to further their education, whether it's a trade school, whether or not it's going to community college or to college, because as you said, a lot of the kids are in poverty, and that is what many times sets them up, because poverty is not just not having the money. Poverty is also poverty of a lack of education. It's a lack of knowing. It's a lack of understanding. It there's so much to poverty that if you haven't read, if you read Ruby Payne,
Ruby Payne.
you'll learn a lot more about this. And so she's a wonderful resource. But we got to stop setting our kids up for failure. And even though you say, my kids are doing gangbusters, are they all doing gangbusters? How many of your kids are being left behind? Now, there are some kids who you try to do everything you possibly can, but it's not always going to work. But you have to remember the teenage brain is not a fully formed brain.
Negative.
The teenage male does not have a fully formed brain, and it doesn't really start to solidify until 24, 25, 26.
Oh, I thought it was like 48. No, I'm sorry. I'm
So you
62 and I'm just now getting it. So
so you have to figure all of you just have to figure all of this out. Now,
yeah.
if they can get a high school diploma or a GED, guess what else they can do?
Go to college?
Even if they're incarcerated, they still qualify, they're still eligible to receive Pell Grants
Yes. Why not?
because
Yeah. Yeah.
right, because under Obama and furthered by Trump, I have no idea where it is with Biden, this was made available. And so to help in prison reform, they saw that just the idea that they could do this, it was amazing, absolutely amazing. And so this gives people a leg up and a way out. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. So, because studies show that with training and education, students can become vital members of contributing society. And I think that's what we need to look at. How is this student going to be a contributing member of society? And sometimes we do become exasperated and we look at a student and we think, oh my gosh, today that kid is just really wasting the air that I breathe. And sometimes, and you're allowed to feel that way, but you also have to remember they're a human being and there's something to it. And maybe it has something to do with family. Maybe it has to do with trauma, all kinds of issues. And there's only so much that we are capable of doing. But as long as we know we've done our best to get there, I think that's one of the first steps. But we also have to keep in mind that not all children are middle class. Not all of them have middle class values. I've met a lot of administrators who ask me, how do you deal with parents who tell you that they need the kids home to babysit? And I say, how do you tell a parent that they can't go to work at their three jobs in order to keep a roof over their head, feed their kids, and put clothes on their back so that they look happy and healthy when they go to school? What's the alternative that you're going to provide for them? How are you going to work with them in order to have that happen? How do you create a partnership with those families? That's why I think we need to have more community sort of networks that are set up in the schools. And I'm not talking about just pre K through 8, I'm talking about pre K through 12, where the parents are involved. And if we can give them some education as well and set that up with the community colleges or something at free and have things set up so that parents can learn how to read and write, because a lot of them you'd be surprised. I was asked the other day, how much are you going to charge me to teach me how to read and write? And I said, in English? And they said, no, Spanish. And I said, oh, geez, I don't know. I mean, people want to have those skills,
Yeah, they do.
but they're also exhausted. So,
Here's something I came across Oregon Youth Authority Quick Facts
mhm.
from January 2023 on the youth population and such in their programs right now. But it says that concerning their social characteristics, diagnosed mental health disorder, 67% the males and 91% of the females have that. Parents use drugs
Wow.
or alcohol. 64 for the men or the males, 75 for the females. Past suicide behaviors, males 13, females 25. History of abuse or neglect, males 54%, females 77%. Special education needs, males 33, females 25. And substance abuse or dependence, males 56, females 66%.
Holy
So
cow.
there's a lot of strikes against these poor kids.
And I think what we have to remember is that we have to have compassion.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that we cry. That doesn't mean that we fawn over them. It means that we understand and that we go into
Yeah.
it with an understanding of how do we take care of them and how do we move them forward. How do we set those boundaries and how do we keep them so that they know that you are safe, that they can learn in a safe environment, and that you're there for them? So even if they do commit a crime, and we're going to be continuing on this, that they're still welcome, wanted, needed, and heard when they come back to you.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I had a student who was convicted of arson, put his parents in a terrible place. They could not find a place to live
Yeah.
because of this. I had to go to court for him, and he kept ending up in juvie. And he and I talked. He would call me from juvie. His PO would call me and tell me that he wanted to talk to me, that we needed to have conversations. We did, because everything that happened, because he made a really stupid mistake,
Yeah.
because people make stupid mistakes. His parents were paying for it. That made him turn to substance abuse. And so it was a parole violation, and he ended up having to be taken back down, and he had to keep going through different kinds of rehab. Great kid, wonderful kid.
Yeah.
Everybody loves him. But he didn't get all of his education,
Mm.
and I did the best I could with him, but he was gone more than he was there. So
I was
you
going to say that if we want the kids to do the best they can, we have to give them places to do that. And we have to work the best we can to give them those places.
and the last thing I could do was, before his PO retired, we tried to formulate some kind of a plan for him so that he could have a future, so that we knew where he could go and what was going to happen. And then he vanished. And then last year, I heard something from somebody about him, and I sent good thoughts, and I ended up getting a text from him. So I know that he's safe, at least
Well,
for
that's
now.
good to know. Because a lot of times that story doesn't end up
Right.
as well. Yeah.
And he is a minority, and he's hooked up with services, but we'll see where it goes. Anyway, so I know this seems kind of a downer of an episode, but
Yeah.
I think that just having these facts, and for people to kind of mull these over and consider, and not to speculate, and not to try to get into the prurient
Yeah.
nature of trying to figure out what their stories are and try to get them to war story why they were gone or anything like that, but just
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
that their circumstances are not your circumstances. You don't you never ever tell a student, I know all about everything, because you don't know everything that there is to know about it.
There's
You
some
know
things they
some
know that you don't want to know
you
about
know some
ever.
wee aspects, and you really don't want to hear. Believe
No,
me,
you
I
don't.
have heard. I have heard things I did not want to hear,
I was a paramedic for
because the
5 years
students
as
thought that I
well.
was safe to hear it, and it's like, no. So
Oh, that's too. Oh, I've overheard things like, "Yo, time out. No, I can't unhear that, and I never want to hear that again."
the other things that people talked about is that they like the fact that they can
Uh,
have it very structured. And let's talk about what teachers say. Teachers say that they like it because it's very structured, and they know that if a kid talks back, all they have to do is snap their fingers or say something. Somebody comes barreling through the door, takes care of the kid, removes them from class. Here's my
kind
question.
of.
Here's my question.
Yeah.
Why? Why?
Why? Yeah, exactly.
Why do you want them removed from class? That's probably what they wanted, or they wanted to see how they could get under your skin. They're probably bored.
It's great
What I found
entertainment.
with my students was, as long as I kept them active, we were kinetic. We had a lot of dialogue that was going. We had quiet time. We would They would prank me, I would prank them back. We had a great time while we were there. We had a great biome where we were. If you foster great relationships with kids, I was asked to go to work at both the transition center for the state as well as the major lockup center for the state. And I just couldn't do it because I did not want to walk around with walkie talkies. And I did not want to have to be in that kind of an atmosphere where I was teaching, because to
Yeah.
me, that takes so much away from teaching. But even when I was at both of those places, because I was there to discuss curriculum and development, because I worked with people from there, I want to see the kids as kids. And when I saw the kids that I knew, both from my gang kids, from all, I saw kids from all different programs that I'd worked in. And I got, hey, and it was so much fun to see them. Winding up,
Yeah.
compassion, think and know and listen. And let's not, let's make sure that kids are kids.
Kids are kids.
So, with that, I'm going to bid you adieu. And Philip,
Aloha.
I will see you next week.
Sounds great.
And until then, adios.